Welcome to our latest episode of Endpoint's Wayfinding Xchange Podcast. We tend to think of navigation as a visual problem. Signs, maps, graphics. The idea that if we make information clearer, people will find their way. But that assumption breaks down very quickly in the real world because people don't arrive in buildings as neutral observers. They arrive stressed, distracted, unfamiliar, sometimes in pain, sometimes overwhelmed, and often not thinking in the way the building expects them to. And yet when we talk about accessibility, the conversation still tends to collapse into compliance. Ramps, lifts, minimum standards, a checklist. What gets lost is something more fundamental. Not can people physically access a space, but can they understand it, trust it, and move through it with confidence? That's where inclusive design and wayfinding start to overlap. Both are at their core about reducing cognitive load, about designing environments that don't require translation, but the industry still tends to separate them. Inclusive design is treated as a constraint, wayfinding as a layer, and the user experience is fragmented. So the question for this conversation is not how do we make spaces accessible? It's what does it actually mean to design a place that works for human beings? And what happens when we take that seriously? To explore that, I'm joined by Ed Warner, CEO and co-founder of Motionspot, one of the UK's leading inclusive design consultancies. Ed, it's great to have you.
Great to be here, Alison.
Brilliant. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited to get into a conversation about inclusive design, but I'd like to start, if I may, with Motionspot. How did it come about? What shifted your perspective that made you think about inclusive design?
Well, it was a story that happened over 20 years ago now. I wasn't a designer by background. I was from a product sales and marketing background with big FMCG corporates. And it was an experience of our co-founder and old school friend of mine, James Taylor, in 2005 that really made me think differently about the environment we all live in. James was on holiday in Portugal. He had a spinal cord injury and a diving accident. He spent 8 months in Stoke Mandeville Hospital and then returned to his flat in Battersea, South London, to live his life as an independent wheelchair user. Except overnight, he found his home resembled more like a clinical care home than his own home, full of all the kit that tends to be so synonymous with ageing and disability. And it was his experience, not just of his apartment, but of all the environment around him that prompted me to look at it with him and realise that our buildings and spaces just aren't designed right for everybody. And there was a need for a new way of thinking and a different type of business to look at this very differently.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's quite a challenge because it takes such a breadth of ideas, of possibilities, of changes, of different ways of how people behave and what we do in spaces and what it means fundamentally to be a person with a series of needs, because we all are.
Absolutely right. And it was even more challenging just being two of us at that time. And,
yeah, I can imagine.
That's impossible to build a business in the world of accessibility and inclusive design just as two people. And what we realised really quickly was we needed to build a team of really talented people, many of whom have the lived experience of disability and other protected characteristics themselves, but many of whom are leading specialists in the field of accessibility and inclusive design. So James and I were the sort of the positive trigger that started the business, but actually the knowledge base and the skill within the business is the collective team.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really interesting that, it triggered you to do something very different from your life previous to that. And also it's such a big thing to try to achieve. It's no mean feat to go, I realise the world isn't built in a sort of a way that everybody can use. So I'm just going to go and create a company and make it happen. The two of you must have felt quite alone and out on a limb. Were there other companies around that you felt were doing the same things in your space at all?
There weren't in 2012 when we set up the business, and there's still very few companies that have the mindset that Motionspot does around accessibility and inclusive design in the built environment. When James and I started, we actually didn't start in commercial buildings at all. We started helping people in their own homes because that was James's experience. Yeah. And we wanted to ensure that homes continued to look like beautiful homes rather than clinical institutions. And we focused initially on design of bathrooms and kitchens and through the floor lifts and access around the home. And what we did over those first few years was we built an amazing client base where we started to better understand the needs of people who had a range of different physical, cognitive, sensory needs. But we also started to understand sort of 3-4 years into the business that we could have an even greater impact on commercial spaces like workplaces and hotels and retailers and hospitals and transport hubs. So we started to understand that the team we were building in that residential sector could translate so well across to the commercial work that we're now doing. And fast forward 14 years and 100% of our business now is focused on working with clients, their architects and their design teams to help them understand how to elevate accessibility and inclusive design above those minimum standards of building regs.
I want to talk about your definition of inclusive design, but before I do, there's something that you said that really resonated with me, because really it's about trust. When people are finding their way, they're navigating using a series of instructions that someone like I decided was the right thing to give them. And you have to trust that I did the right thing. And in a way, when you're trying to make an environment work for everybody, it's about trusting the behaviours of people. It's about making sure that it's really well tested. And it's about ensuring that people believe that what you're being kind of provided with will do what you need it to do, but not in a ugly, quirky, strange, peculiar way. I don't really even know how to frame that into a question. All I know is that you made me think of a time. My mum was very ill and she was in intensive care and her kidneys had failed. And they said that they needed to put her on this special kind of dialysis. And they wheeled this machine out that looked like it'd been made in someone's garage that clacked really loudly. And I just thought that Heath Robinson had come in. Yeah. And they were like, we're going to take all the blood out of your mum's body and shove it through this machine. And I was like, I'm expected to trust that.
Yeah.
And I feel like when we talk about inclusivity, we're always talking about ramps, and they're always these afterthought ugly things that have been added on because they were never thought as just being a natural part of the environment or the society.
Yes.
And you, as somebody who wants to use that ramp, has to trust that that ramshackled Heath Robinson thing is okay and is all right. And everybody who isn't in that position doesn't get how entitled you are.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to live in that world where I've got to trust that thing that got cobbled together or bolted on afterwards.
Yeah. The changes we've seen over the last 14 years have been around acceptance and understanding that accessible and inclusive design can't be an afterthought.
Exactly.
It can't be secondary in terms of its design, look and feel. And, you know, for so long, the work we were doing in the really early days was just to demonstrate that simple things like a wheelchair accessible toilet doesn't have to look like it fits into a hospital.
Yes.
It can resemble the same look and feel as the non-accessible toilet. And it's not just can, it should represent
yes.
it. There should be an equitable experience.
Yes.
So from our perspective, we're very much design-led as accessibility and inclusive design consultants. And we're always trying to work with clients and their design teams to give them the confidence that accessible doesn't have to be monochrome. It doesn't have to be bland. It doesn't have to be second best in its design intent. And the point you make about trust is a really interesting one, because previously the guidance that has shaped the world of access consultancy and early inclusive design has been based on regulations.
Yes.
And that's what people trust.
Yeah, that's true.
The good news with regulations is they get people to think about it. The bad news is that often people think regulations is the be-all and end-all, and they have to follow that to the letter.
Yeah.
And if they follow it to the letter, they're going to design an accessible and inclusive building for everyone. Yeah. And the challenge we have as an industry is if you follow building regulations, which everyone should, and please don't think I'm not saying don't follow building regs, you'll focus on design of ramps and accessible entrances and wheelchair accessible toilets, and features that predominantly focus around design for physical disability, in particular wheelchair users. But in reality, only 7% of disabled people are wheelchair users. So the work we do is design for the 7%, but also the 93% of people who may have another physical, cognitive, sensory condition. So it's about helping clients and their design teams understand how to go above and beyond those minimum standards. And that trust only comes through talking to people. And you started to allude to that in your question of, there has to be engagement with people of lived experience to give feedback on what's working and what's not working in the space.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's so many things to unpack with that. Maybe we should start with a definition of inclusive design. Can we define it? Is it even possible to define inclusive design?
It depends who you talk to.
I'm absolutely certain it does.
So I think you very much can. And I would urge anyone listening to this to go and have a read of a document called the REBA Inclusive Design Overlay, which was published in 2023 and is a framework that helps clients, their architects, contractors, project managers understand what they need to be thinking about at all stages of the design and build process. And there's a really good interpretation of inclusive design in there, and it's all about removing barriers that cause undue separation and stress for people in the built environment, and ensuring that everybody accesses places and spaces independently, confidently, comfortably, safely, in the right way. And that's a definition of inclusive design I very much support.
I think it's a brilliant definition of inclusive design, and it has really quite a few overlaps with wayfinding, because that's what we're also trying to do.
I'm sure.
And it is as much a cognitive thing as it is a physical thing. I wanted to also touch on something you said earlier around the idea of compliance. I think that's a really interesting place, because we're often asked by clients, well, what is wayfinding compliance?
Yes.
And we say to clients, well, it's lots of different things. And I know that's a whole other discussion. But I feel like what you just said about inclusive design kind of goes down those same routes. It's like if we carry on in a world that gives us the answer through compliance, then we'll carry on making bad design decisions.
Absolutely right. And there's so much connectivity between wayfinding and inclusive design. And what you've said absolutely resonates for our field as well. If you design for minimum standards, you're not going to design for everybody. So how can you understand better who's using your building and space? What are the needs that they have? What are the challenges they're finding in that environment? And how can you then sort of bake in solutions as part of the design process that don't have to cost any more? And again, there's such a sort of misunderstanding that, accessibility and inclusive design has to cost more. It doesn't, if you think about it early enough in the design process, because the decisions you're making at that point, it doesn't impact the cost in any way. And I'm sure it's very similar for the conversations you're having in wayfinding.
Hugely similar. I wonder if there's something about clients in all of this too. Do you find that clients come to you and they still in their head have a reference around compliance? Or do you think that the clients that are coming to you really understand inclusive design and what it means?
We have clients at both ends of those scale. And, I'd say the majority of clients are somewhere between the middle of early stage understanding this and being totally bought in from top down around the reasons why they need to do it. So often we'll speak to clients where they will understand, partly because it's driven by the people within their businesses who are having conversations around the challenges that are being experienced in those environments. So they will often build it into an RFP for a design and build project to say accessibility and inclusive design is really important for us. But they won't necessarily know
what that actually
means. And a lot of the work we do in the very early stages of defining the brief is actually to help a client understand what it means. And, particularly in the really early conversations, there's actually quite a lot of sort of empathy building around, what is inclusive design? Who are we designing for? What are the common challenges that people have? And also, how can an accessibility and inclusive design consultant be involved in the right way at different REBA stages, that is involved enough to have an impact, but isn't so involved it becomes too much of a cost. And also, we don't need to be involved in every meeting, every DTM, but being involved at the right times and having the right conversations with the right stakeholders at the right point will generate the right result at the end. So we have clients at both ends of that sort of maturity of understanding of what accessibility and inclusive design is.
I totally recognise that. I mean, we talk about wayfinding, and it's a term that lots of people use now. I mean, it's commonly used, but still completely misunderstood.
Yes.
And people go, "Well, you do signs, don't you?" Well, no, we talk about how people find their way, and that means it's about what they see, what they hear, what they smell, what they can touch. All of these things make a massive difference. And we still have quite a few people who misrepresent it or don't understand it. No, it needs to be a part of building a building, but don't necessarily know the breadth of what it is.
And it's, again, similar to us because the specialism of wayfinding requires a certain skill set and perspective and knowledge base around what's required, in a similar way to accessibility and inclusive design. And it's so hard to ask an architect that has so many different things to think about as part of a project, has to be the generalist on a project and leading the design. But actually, the world of accessibility and inclusive design is moving so quickly at the moment. There's new research coming out all the time. It's really hard for architectural teams to keep up with that new research and to bring the different perspectives in that's required to give the right output from an accessibility inclusive design viewpoint. And I'm sure it's similar for Endpoint.
Absolutely. Most definitely. So if this was a forum where you had the opportunity to reach out to people and actually say, this is the cohort that we're designing for, it's all of these sorts of people, or at least in this particular environment, we lean in towards some of this as opposed to some of that, what would that be? What would that look like?
So on many of our projects, we run engagement sessions at a really early stage with the people using these buildings and spaces. So for a commercial workplace, for example, that would involve engagement with business resource groups, employee resource groups around disability, around faith, around gender and other protected characteristics, to get their feedback at a really early stage around some of the challenges that they're finding, and actually then report on some of those themes to senior leaders. Because the best projects are the ones where we can demonstrate evidence of these are the challenges you've got. Actually, these are the really small things you can change that will make a massive difference. And if we've got that data behind the design decision, it's much easier to make the change as part of the design process. So really early stakeholder engagement in those design decisions is so important.
And I think you just said something really interesting, that some of those challenges or some of those things you might change could be quite small.
Absolutely.
Have you got an example off the top of your head of a small thing that actually can make a massive difference?
Oh, there are hundreds of,
I'm sure.
of small changes, but examples include simple things like changing the colour of a wall versus how it contrasts with the floor finish.
Yeah.
Again, it doesn't need to be a black and a white, contrast, but having that as a principle makes such a difference for someone with any form of cognitive disability or vision loss. The acoustics in a space, again, makes a massive difference to how people respond. You mentioned, neuro-inclusive design principles earlier on, and we're seeing that as a major driver for so many clients thinking about access and inclusion. And there are so many small changes that are required around neuro-inclusive design principles, around use of pattern, quiet spaces, position of desks and working areas, to name a few. And what we so often do is we'll have a conversation around neuro-inclusive design principles, but then extend that to actually what other groups are you thinking about and how can those small changes be made too.
But that's really nice that, if you can't get everything included, you start with one thing and then just start to move it along so that you get the conversation going into as many different areas as you can. I think there's something really kind of nice about that, in the sense that if you start with parameters that clients understand, then at least you start breaking down some of those barriers to other places.
It's a good way of describing it. It is a conversation.
Yeah.
And I think these topics can be massively overwhelming for clients.
I think that's very true. I think clients want to do their best.
Yes.
They want their buildings to do everything they need it to do. And you said, like a commercial workplace, you want the people that work there to enjoy it. We Absolutely. Used to talk a million years ago about sick building syndrome,
yes.
which was all about the impact of a space on a person.
Yes.
We're all people.
Yeah.
We should feel almost intuitive to design a building that works for us. But the issue is that we're all people that only know our little world, and we have to find a way of stepping outside of it and understanding what's going on for lots of other people.
Yeah, it's bringing those different perspectives in, and it's about building things slowly, or at least the right pace for the particular client or project, because there are some fundamental changes that can be made to buildings that will make a massive difference for a large group of people. And those fundamental differences are often the ones that are grounded in building regs around access and mobility. But then there are so many other smaller changes that make such a difference to large groups of people, not just disabled people, but also looking outside of disability, designing for faith and ethnic background, culture, gender. There are some really important interventions in the built environment that will suit different groups of people. That's the difference between inclusive design, which is all about designing for choice and diversity, versus universal design, which is more of a US term, but is also used in some countries in Scandinavia, which is more around designing one solution for everybody.
Yeah.
And we often say to clients, we've never designed a building that is accessible and inclusive for everybody. Yeah. It's impossible to deliver that.
Yeah.
But what you can do is design flexibility and choice into those spaces to make it as accessible and inclusive for as many people as possible. And the really important thing is where there are constraints, and there are always constraints within a building due to its age or stage of build or budget, that the client understands what those constraints are. And we always say a building is only as accessible and inclusive as the people who operate it.
Yeah.
So making sure those people operating the building are aware of the constraints in that development and can find management solutions around it.
So it's advocacy, really, in a way.
A big part of this is advocacy and empathy building and just helping people understand who we're designing for.
Yeah. I mean, who wouldn't want that? But I also do understand why clients find it overwhelming, because there's so many things that are banded around in the press about what inclusivity really means, what universal design really means, what it means to be compliant. Then you've also got a practical perspective of, I've got an architect, an interior designer, potentially a landscaper, I've got a construction team, I've got a budget which is finite, and it's another thing that feels, I think, to clients like it's overwhelming. I don't really understand it.
Yes.
How do we change that? Is it just these conversations? Is it just about talking about advocacy? Is it finding those one little ways in?
I think it's a number of things. It's access and inclusive design consultants being aware that the recommendations that are made on projects have an impact in so many different areas. And we need to be really aware of the decisions being made across the board and all the other consultants that fall into that design process. So to give you an example, acoustics on hand dryers in wheelchair accessible toilets, in fact, not just wheelchair accessible toilets, but all toilets, for a number of neurodivergent people, particularly autistic people, the decibel level on the hand dryer is massively disorientating, distracting, and painful. So from a choice point of view, one of our recommendations is around looking at the decibel level on hand dryers, but also providing paper towel alternatives. Now, paper towel alternatives don't then necessarily support the sustainability consultant's brief around trying to remove them from washrooms. So it's back to that conversation piece you were mentioning. The recommendations need to be discussed internally as a consultant team to reach a decision before then going to the client with a particular design recommendation. And there are always conversations that our team have where they're proposing recommendations and other consultants say, actually, you can't do that for these reasons, but can we do this? And we'll say, actually, you can, but if you tweak it in this way, it'll make it even more accessible. And I think that is part of a good design process. The other part to it is, and we've been doing a lot of this over the last couple of years, is recognising, particularly around the cost and budget, around how you can demonstrate value for accessibility and inclusive design. And the stats are overwhelming on this. You know, the figures are now 20% of the UK population have a disability. We did some research 18 months ago around ADHD in the workplace and found that 22% of people were not accepting jobs because the design of the environment didn't suit their ADHD. And 15% were actually leaving the workplace because their workplace wasn't designed to suit their needs. So there's a big part here around recruitment and retention of the best diverse talent. And if we can find ways of demonstrating that actually by making small changes in the built environment can help with recruitment, retention, productivity, belonging, bringing your best self to work or whatever environment you're living or enjoying, then that massively helps. And, you know, there are some really good examples of this. So Motionspot worked with Barclays on a large campus for them in Glasgow. And this was a new development for 5,000 employees. And we were engaged in the early days because there were a high number of neurodivergent people going to be working in that development. And so we were engaged as the inclusive design consultant at all REBA stages. But we actually did some return on investment analysis with Barclays shortly after they opened the building. And they found that for every £1 they spent on inclusive design as part of the design process, saved them £100 in later stage retrofits and workplace adjustments. So just demonstrating that sort of return on investment and value certainly helps the conversation for development managers when they are looking to sign off these budgets internally.
I think there's two things in that have like real synergy with wayfinding. Firstly, people don't recognise the value that good wayfinding can bring, and often don't realise how much of a financial or a personal impact it can have when people get lost.
Yes.
I think people just go, well, they just got lost, didn't they?
Yes.
But actually, it's much deeper than that. We all know what it feels like to get lost. It's one of the most terrifying things. And if you miss a plane, for example, or you miss a hospital appointment, and the NHS is paid for by all of us, there is a big financial cost to it. And I think that it can be quite hard to convey that. So it's really nice that you've got bits of research that can really show, look at how much value this is adding. And the other thing that I thought really resonated was you said about how the design team come together and you start to talk about your different perspectives and how they come together to create an approach.
Yes.
And we often start nowadays, we often start our wayfinding strategies with a bit of an attitude or a manifesto. So we sit down with a client and we talk about wayfinding is a lot of things. What does it mean to you in this place? Mm-hmm. And I think that the act of doing that with an internal design team where everyone's got different perspectives.
Yes.
With a client, if that's the right moment to do it, because I think it depends on, for us, whether it's a retrofit, an existing or a brand new build, because there's different approaches and different teams. I think once we can get everybody on board with what our attitude is, it just gets so much easier.
Absolutely right.
Because it makes it clearer in everyone's mind. Oh, we're doing it like this because of this.
Yes. We always like to create an accessibility and inclusive design strategy as part of a project.
Yeah.
Because it aligns the thinking of different stakeholders. It involves engagement from different groups to identify who's actually going to contribute to this, whether that be employee resource groups or whether that's going out to public consultation. But it also sets the North Star to how the project is going to run and what sort of recommendations our team will be making at different stages. And it sounds like it's really similar for wayfinding. And it'd be great to look at putting those two together. So it's an accessibility and inclusive design strategy that has a really important chapter in there around wayfinding.
I mean, that would be amazing. But I also think that the sense of overwhelm that comes from clients can also be echoed by fellow members of the design team.
Yes.
Because there is always going to be a bit of, fear's not the right word, but concern. If I'm the interior designer, I've got to make sure that this is super inclusive, but still matches all of those qualities that I'm trying to get across. What if those materials don't exist or don't quite do what they want, what I want it to do as part of the design quality? And I think that's where those early conversations become so important, because then we realise how close together we all really are, and that we're all really wanting the same thing.
Absolutely.
And I think it's fundamental.
Yeah.
And the fact that you come at inclusive design from this idea that it shouldn't be a bolt-on and it shouldn't look fundamentally different, or that it's not an equitable solution.
Absolutely right.
I think that's the selling point. I guess it goes back to advocacy.
It does. It's all about building confidence with the design team.
Yeah.
That there is a specialist in the background and often in the foreground.
Yeah.
To be that sounding board.
Yeah.
And what we always say to designers is be as creative as you can be. Don't restrict the thinking.
Yeah.
But just use our team to bounce those thoughts around. Can I do this? Would this material work?
Yeah.
And the recommendations we make will either say, yes, it absolutely does, or no, it doesn't for this reason, and this group of people would be impacted. But actually, if you changed it in this way, you'd make it more accessible and inclusive.
Yeah.
So it's about
a dialogue.
building that confidence, having that conversation and being there for those questions.
We get asked all the time, what's technology going to do for wayfinding? And it's a very complex answer.
Yeah.
I imagine it's a very complex answer in the inclusive design field. But I also imagine it gets asked a lot. And how do you deal with it?
It's interesting. Technology is being discussed a lot, but there is a real understanding in the world of accessibility and inclusive design that bringing technology in without getting the basics right won't deliver any benefit to anybody. And we are massive supporters of technology to improve experience within buildings and spaces for disabled people and people with other protected characteristics. But you've got to get those fundamentals right. And we've seen certain situations where a project is focusing so much on technology that actually someone can't access the building where the technology is.
Yeah.
So our first thing is, let's get the fundamentals right. Let's get the access in the building right. And then how can technology be overlaid on top of that? And, you know, from an accessibility point of view, technology could be anything from a simple hearing loop through to use of NaviLens technology to help someone navigate a building who may be blind or partially sighted, through to use of room booking systems. How can you make them more accessible? We were involved in a design team meeting the other day where, you know, the client was using retina scanners for access to the building, and there are so many important fundamentals there around the height, the position. Is everybody comfortable to be scanned in this way? Those are the type of questions that are asked around technology. So we always say, think about the physical environment, get the basics right, and then overlay technology on top of that.
Do you think anyone's getting all of it right anywhere? Or is it really actually that the gold standard is super ambitious, and as long as we keep plugging away and trying and moving the goalposts and keep pushing forward, that's not enough, that's not the phrase, but, you know, that's the hope, because then you can keep moving the ambition on.
Yeah. Thank you for your extended question. It brought me some time to think about think about the answer. I think it's the big message here is progress over perfection.
Yeah.
You know, let's keep moving things on without wanting to do so much that it becomes overwhelming and we don't have any activity. So it goes back to the conversation we were having about let's build on good work that's already been done. Is there an example of an environment that is perfect and accessible and inclusive for everybody? No. But there are some really good examples from different sectors that, you know, we're forever kind of pulling together and wanting to share as part of thought leadership pieces, because we're really passionate that inclusive design shouldn't sit with us as a knowledge base. We want to be talking to people about it and changing mindsets and having a greater impact on a global scale. So we need to be sort of sharing the learnings that work.
And it kind of leads me back to what I'd forgotten earlier. Different groups have different requirements. And as you said, try not to think about people as groups. Think about where you might be able to join the thread.
Yes.
There can be some big conflicts in what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Because for one group of people, it could be really overwhelming. And for another group of people, it could be just what they need.
Yes.
How do we find the middle ground?
Through designing choice.
Yeah.
So again, we're having conversation in our studio yesterday. We played a lunch and learn video around ADHD in the workplace, and we then had a conversation over people who may be hyposensitive and hypersensitive to the environment. And we then, you know, that then led on to how do you design a meeting room for two very different groups of people. You know, on the one hand, you'll have a meeting room that needs lots of pattern and colour to trigger the right feelings in people, so that they are absolutely at their best in that meeting room. And then you'll have another group of people that will be massively overwhelmed by all of that. And the simple way around that is having a choice of meeting rooms that either have more subtle tones, and again, doesn't have to be a white wall and a dark carpet. You can deliver really subtle, welcoming look and feel of a meeting room in a very different way. And then you have other rooms that do have a bit more stimulation. So it's about providing choice to to ensure you're designing for different groups of people.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's harder in wayfinding to design in choice because you get a decision point and we have to give you an instruction.
Yes.
But I actually think that's where technology does make a difference, because I think that what technology does in wayfinding is it starts to personalise journeys.
Yes.
And enables you to take a different path.
Yes.
Which means that we could all be doing, in essence, the same thing. You and I could leave here today and go to a coffee shop.
Yeah.
But it might be that your personalised device takes you in a very different route than mine.
Yeah.
And that's simply because it kind of understands your preferences and needs and my preferences and needs.
Yeah.
So in some respects, I think technology will help wayfinding give that level of flexibility.
Yes.
I think it's kind of really interesting how it's different, but again, kind of the same.
It
Choice, flexibility,
Yeah.
advocacy.
And there's a really close connection, again, between wayfinding and inclusive design, because, you know, for so many people going into a new building or space where they don't know where they're going, actually, how can we be getting better at communicating what they're going to see in that space or experience in that space in advance of their visit?
Yeah.
And a big part of our work once projects are completed is to help clients create some form of welcome guidance that's in a really accessible and inclusive format that gives users of their space information before they get to that building or space as to where they need to go, what they're going to experience when they're there, and try and make the wayfinding seem as natural as possible before they get into the building. And then it's over to you around how can you make the signage and build in technology and make the experience right when someone's there.
Yeah. I mean, for us, the whole journey is really important. Wayfinding starts from the moment you decide you're going to make the journey.
Yes.
Because if you decide to go somewhere and you pick up your phone and go, I'm just going to look it up first of all, well, you get told on the website how you access that website, whether you can access that website is already the beginnings. If the wayfinding information is 20 clicks away from the homepage and you're fed up and you can't even find the address to put into Google Maps, then it's already a done deal.
Yeah.
You might suddenly go, oh, maybe I won't bother.
And that's back to your point. It's about the end-to-end user experience. This isn't about signage.
Yeah, exactly. And how we build mental models of spaces before we go to them is really important.
Yes.
Because what we rely on is our idea of what those spaces may have been like in the past. We rely on familiarity. So, you know, I think I always say this the thing that if you got a letter through the post and you've got a hospital appointment, you're going to go, oh no, I've got to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
And you're stressed because you've got to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
But then you think, oh gosh, where's the car park for that building? It's got a really long medical name that I don't understand. And then I know it's going to be hard to find my way. I'm going to have to leave 3 hours before, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a very different experience than, oh, I fancy going and doing some shopping in town. You're still navigating, you're still wayfinding, but how you feel about it is based around your mental model in your mind of what it's going to be like.
And stress levels and anxiety versus being more comfortable in that environment.
Yeah.
And that connects really nicely to you know, the concept of temporary, situational and permanent disabilities.
Yes.
Because, you know, for that given moment, someone might not have a disability, but the fact that they're anxious or stressed is a temporary disability in that point, and they're going to think and act differently. The same way that if someone was going to, you know, a restaurant or a bar and the acoustics are bad and they can't hear, you know, the bartender or the person serving them and can place their order, that's a situational, you know, disability. So this is part of our conversation with clients. It isn't just about designing for a group of people who may have a different need. It's thinking about those temporary and situational disabilities as well. And ultimately, just thinking about inclusive design as being good design.
Yes. and trying to take the overwhelm and the sting out of it.
Yeah.
And then it can be about advocacy.
Absolutely.
And I think there's also something in it's okay to get it wrong.
Yes.
And I think maybe some of the overwhelm from clients is the fear of getting it wrong.
Yes.
And maybe it's that mis-selling of guidelines and regulation and compliance is that, oh gosh, I'm going to get it wrong if I don't make the cat height this big or make that flooring like this. But actually, you're saying it's okay to get it wrong because we've tried, we've created an attitude, we've done our best, we've worked really hard to try and reach a goal that perfection doesn't exist anywhere.
Yeah.
And we've got a better outcome than we would have if we'd have just put the Equities Act on the table or the building regs on the table.
Absolutely. We wouldn't ever sort of position it as getting it wrong because, to your point, it's successful in the sense that it's been tried.
Yeah.
And there is evidence behind why it's been tried.
Yeah.
And importantly, we only realise whether it's wrong by talking to people after buildings are finished and are in use. And I think across our industry, you know, that doesn't happen enough. The post-occupancy evaluations and, you know, they don't have to be particularly complicated or extensive, actually just to get some feedback from people around what's working and what's not working, and then take those learnings on to the next project. And it's all then about putting those building blocks in place and learnings to keep improving.
Yeah, definitely. It's really fascinating. I would like to ask the question, because I think it's a really interesting question. In 10 years' time, what will we look back on and realise we got wrong about inclusion right now?
Oh, what a question.
I know, and I had to ask it because it is such a good question.
I think in 10 years' time, there would be a realisation that designing to minimum standards of building regs doesn't design for everybody.
Yeah.
And hopefully in 10 years' time, accessibility and inclusive design will be better understood and taught in architectural colleges and universities. So it is baked in as part of their course, and not just architects, but interior designs and other professionals in the built environment.
Would you like there to be a time when the phrase inclusive design doesn't exist because it's just what we do as humans?
I've always said that I would love at the end of my career for there not to be a need for an accessibility and inclusive design consultant.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that will be the case because of how the specialism is moving and because of all the evidence that's coming out around different perspectives. There is a need for a specialism in this area, but ultimate success in this space is for accessibility and inclusive design just to be part of good design.
Yeah, definitely.
A long answer to your 10-year question.
No, I think it's a really good answer, and I kind of interjected as well, so that probably
no problem.
Didn't help. I think there's been some really, really fascinating takeaways. I love the fact that we're talking about it being around advocacy. I love the fact that we're talking about getting users involved in the design process. We do have clients who more and more want to get users involved, but it's another one of those places that people find it a bit overwhelming and a bit difficult. Who are those users? Where do I get them from? Do I have them already? I don't know. You know, there can be a lot of questions.
Yes.
And where you're brought in within the design process, being in early enough, that really resonates from a wayfinding perspective. And then that piece about evaluation, we get the same thing, particularly on a new build where everything is untested. We're looking in a model in Revit or on a set of plans, and we're making the rules around how people are going to move. And then once it's open, there's always going to be somebody that surprises you. Yeah. And you want to learn from those things and evaluate those things and take it in through the next piece that you do. For me, that feels like they're the really key things. I don't know if there's anything else that you think actually there's this as well that's super key for any client or person in the design teams that might listen to this.
I think you've summarised it really well. Getting involved early as part of the design process is key. bringing in voices of lived experience as part of the design process. But also, if the project can't accommodate that, and there are lots of projects where user engagement can't happen for whatever reason, then drawing on an accessibility and inclusive design specialists bank of knowledge and research, as well as we've done extensive user group research on lots of different areas and environments that we can bring to clients. So not worrying that actually if engagement can't happen on a project, the thinking can still be embedded into it. But also just encouraging design teams to really open themselves up to understanding more about this. And we're seeing a wave of designers coming into our industry who are recently graduated, who are really interested in this area. And that's not to say that people who've been in the industry for longer aren't, but there is definitely a shift going on. And I'd really encourage all designers to be really open to understanding who they're designing for, and to, as we started talking about right at the beginning of this conversation, to understand that inclusive design doesn't have to be a secondary afterthought. It doesn't have to look secondary in its design look and feel, and just building in the right principles at the right time.
And I think the really reassuring thing, as a fellow designer, is that idea of, let's just think of compliance as a dirty word, let's just go, what can we do? And just be open-minded about it.
Yeah.
And that it's okay to fail at that we did our best, we learned something from it, and then we tried to take those learnings and build them into the next thing.
Yeah.
It's the iteration, isn't it?
It is. We always say compliance is the floor.
Yes.
And what we want to do is set a new ceiling. And where we end up is somewhere between the floor and the ceiling on every project. And what we're trying to do as a business is actually build research and data that demonstrates how and why building regulations should change over time.
Yeah.
And I'm so often asked, well, actually, shouldn't we just change building regs? And yes, we will in time, but actually the market needs to move before building regs moves.
Yeah.
Because the market demonstrates the need, and then retrospectively building regs catches up with it and says, okay, we now need to be building in these additional things. So thinking about the floor and the ceiling and where you are between those two is really important.
Absolutely. The thing about regulation is that it moves as slowly as an iceberg, because it has to.
For good reason.
Yeah. I mean, that's how the system is set up.
Yes.
It's based around the idea of case law.
Yes.
And the idea that real life happens, which changes the regulation, rather than the regulation happens, which changes the real life.
Absolutely.
I've really enjoyed this. I have to say, it's been really fascinating, and I could literally talk to you all day.
Oh, great to speak.
So thank you so much. And I think that was really insightful, and I think there's some really, really great takeaways. And I hope that it's eased the minds of some of our colleagues, clients that feel overwhelmed, because actually it's really inspiring. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having the conversation.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to our latest Wayfinding Xchange podcast. Stay tuned for further episodes, and feel free to contact us with any questions and suggestions for future episodes.